episode, we are going to be diving into our thoughts on SEC teams with first roster retention, guys who graduated, portal additions, and then high school signing classes. We get a lot of new coaches in the SEC this year, so it's really fun to look at how they built out their new rosters. And I do want to highlight the roster retention because if you keep 45 guys from the previous year, you've got to announce that on social media now that they're staying put. So we'll roll over to Kevin to start with Ole Miss here.
So Ole Miss, they had a lot of guys go in and a lot of guys come out. They signed a lot of guys. So if I break down their roster this year versus last year, and kind of that's what we're going to try to do with this, I think they took a slight step backwards is where I would go with it. So I'm going to start on the defensive side of the ball for Ole Miss because I think that's going to have to be an area that they have to improve if they want to get back in the playoffs and compete for a national championship. I'm going to start at defensive end. I think that's the position that they took the biggest hit in. They lost Prince Umealion and Deshaun Womack. They're two starters, and then they lost a couple backups at that position too. Total of about 12 and a half, 13 sacks that they lost production-wise. And they picked up guys that when you listen to Ole Miss people, they're high on them, but production-wise is just not really there. Jordan Renaud from Alabama, who has a half a sack in 2 years. Maldonado, the defensive end from Nevada, he's number-wise their best sack guy. He had 5 sacks at Nevada, but again, that's against a lot lower competition. And then Blake Buchanan from Oregon that transferred in, he had 2 sacks. So from a production standpoint, 13 sacks to 7.5, and 5 of those at a lot lower level. I think they take a big hit at the defensive end position. I do like what they did at defensive tackle with Michael Burrow from Florida to go with William Eccles. I think those two will start and be solid defensive tackles. And then they took Jaheim Otis from Colorado and Alabama. And I'll be honest, I think Otis is one of these guys that's chasing the money, and I don't think his production, the last 2 years, he's not really played very much or very well at all. But he's a talented guy, and he's a depth guy, so you got to give, that to them. So I think they improved their defensive tackle position, even though they took a hit at defensive end. Linebacker, Luke Farrelly, the one that everybody's talking about that they got from Cal/Clemson, was an honorable mention ACC guy. Basically, he will be their middle linebacker to take TJ Daughtery's place. In my opinion, they take a little hit again here. Daughtery had 98 tackles last year, led the SEC. And while Farrelly's a good player, I don't think he's quite the level of Daughtery. So I think if you look at their front 7, they take a little bit of a hit, even though they may be stronger at DT. And then that takes us to the secondary. And I'll be honest, I think actually they improved their secondary, if you just want my opinion, which I think the secondary was their weakness last year. They have Jonel Aguero at safety, Jay Crawford at cornerback, and Edwin Joseph at safety. 3 key guys that have a lot of experience and played pretty well. Aguero was at Georgia, Crawford was at Auburn, and Joseph was at Florida State. So I like what they did with their secondary. But being in the middle linebacker and edge, not being able to put the pressure on the quarterbacks, I think their defense will take a slight step backwards. So I just think they won't quite be as good defensively, which to me puts them at risk because there's a lot of games that they won this year that were very close that they just honestly outscored their opponents. So then I take that and go over to the offensive side of the football. You've got Chambliss, who's most likely coming back. Deuce Knight, who transferred in, and Walker Howard at quarterback. They lost Austin Simmons. So, quarterback position, I think, is still very solid for them. Chambliss is a good player. I like Deuce Knight. And Howard's a good depth guy for them there. And running back, you got Keywan Lacey, maybe the best running back in the SEC that's coming back for them. And I do like what they've added depth-wise there. JT Lindsey, Mekhi Frazier are a couple of guys that they've added from a depth factor. Last year they had no depth, and so I think they could be a little stronger at running back. The position that I think they take a big hit offensively is wide receiver. Deshaun Stribling, Wallace, and then Caden Lee transferring. Lee had over 1,500 yards the last 2 years and 100 catches. And they're basically replacing that with Daryl Gill, the wide receiver from Syracuse, who has some talent, and Caleb Cunningham, the freshman that they would expect to pay more this year, and Jonte Cook. I don't think the wide receiver room is near as talented as what they've lost with those guys. Cook was, when he played at Texas, had 100 yards. So he had 500 last year at Syracuse. A lot less competition in that league. Gill had 500 yards at Syracuse too, and Cunningham, didn't really play a lot last year. So there's some talented guys, but I just don't think it's going to be near the same there. And then that you transition that to the offensive line. So in the middle of their offensive line, they bring their guards back. They think Patrick Kudus is going to get another year. So I think interior they're good. I think, again, the question will be at, the tackle position. They lose both starting offensive tackles. Looking at who they got, I think you're probably going to see Carius Kern play right tackle for him. I still think he's a guard. But when you look at what they have, I think he's probably going to push out to right tackle. He played a lot for LSU at tackle this year, so I think he can compete there. And then left tackle is, to me, they lose Diego Pounds, who was a pretty solid player. They got to tackle today Tommy Kinsler from Miami. But to me, he's nowhere near the talent that Pounds is. So I really think they take a little bit of hit at both tackle spots and wide receiver, strengthen themselves at running back with just the depth factor. Interior offensive line solid, and quarterback room is good. So, overall, I think I look at Ole Miss as just a hair step back, but definitely a step back this year. I look at them more of an 8-4 type team versus what they were last year. I do think they came up with some good additions late. I think without Farrelly, without getting him late, without getting Kinsler, who, again, has a lot of question marks at tackle, without getting those guys at positions of need, I think they would have taken a hit. And Michael Burrow, I think, was a big addition at defensive tackle. I think getting those guys helped their team just solidify their team. And they got Gill late this week, too, at wide receiver. So I think, those were big pickups to keep them competitive in the league. So anybody got any thoughts on Ole Miss?
Yeah, they really lost production on defense, that's for sure. With Graves going to Missouri, TJ Daugherty and Princewell going to LSU, that's a lot of their defensive production that left. So, I know they've especially at edge, they added quite a few guys. But I don't know if they're going to be able to replace the linebacker production or the defensive end production that they lost.
I would agree 100%. I think they take steps back there.
D-Mac, who you got up next in the portal, buddy?
Yeah, so I got the Florida Gators coming off a 4-8 season in which they fired their coach mid-season. New head coach John Summerall from Tulane takes over, and all he's done is win everywhere he's gone. So, I'm gonna start on defense as well here, breaking down the defensive line. So Tyreek Sapp he graduated, he's out of eligibility. But they return Cameron Jones, Brendan Bett, Jamari Lyons, and then they did bring a few guys in. One guy that really interests me who didn't put up a ton of stops or a ton of stats at Baylor last year is DK Kalu. I think he's got the potential to be a good role player for them. They did lose Michael Burrow, who's going to Ole Miss, so that's going to be a tough piece to make up. But Cameron Jones is going to be really good. Brendan Bett is another key returning piece. So I do like what they were able to retain. Losing one of their top three returners is tough, but they brought two other quality guys back. And then they added a few more guys in the portal. Mason Clinton from Southern Miss, Emmanuel Idabayo from Jacksonville State, who had 5 sacks for Jacksonville State last year. So they did add some good role players. And then their linebacker room, I absolutely love this group. So they only lose Grayson Howard, who transferred out, but they return Miles Graham, they return Aaron Childs, Jaden Woods, who's going to play a little bit of edge too, Jaden Robinson. So they return from the linebacker group about 13 sacks from last year, which is a really good place for them to be. A lot of young guys in that linebacker room. Jaden Woods was a true freshman. Aaron Giles was a sophomore. Miles Graham was a sophomore. So they've got some really good returning pieces there. And then when I get to their secondary, they did lose a little bit here. Sharif Denson went to Ole Miss. Jordan Castell went to Kentucky, and Devin Moore graduated, who were three of their top four guys in the secondary this past season. Bryce Thornton's back. A guy that I think was really key for them as a true freshman to retain was Laganza Hayward. He's going to play nickel back for him or safety next year. Really talented kid as a true freshman. Played sparingly, but was really showing some good things there towards the end of the season. So really like him. And then I would say their most impactful addition in the portal from a defensive back standpoint. DJ Coleman has a lot of experience from Baylor, but I really like the Cam Dooley addition from Kentucky. Um, Cam Dooley is going to be a really big part of that safety room moving forward. But they will have to shore up a few things at cornerback next year. They do have Cormani McLean coming back and a few guys, but they're going to need to have somebody step up who either transferred in or a new signee there. So I like overall though how they were able to retain some key guys on defense, and they did a pretty good job overall with adding a few pieces to the line and to the secondary. So I give them like a B rating for their defense retention and what they were able to bring in. So on the offensive side though, yeah, they lose 3 starters. On the offensive line, Jake Slaughter, their center, was really good. He graduated. Austin Barber, who was their left tackle, is gone. And then Damian George is also gone, who was their right guard. Bryce Lovett and Najee Harris return. So I feel like they lost a lot more on the defensive line or on the offensive line than they're gaining. They did bring Harrison Moore over from Georgia Tech. I would say the guy I'm most interested to see develop on the offensive line is going to be TJ Shanahan, who's still got a couple years of eligibility after transferring in from Penn State. He's an Orlando kid, so back playing closer to home. But this offensive line, I think, is going to be in a tougher spot than it was this past year. So, a lot of work to do there too. And then I'm going to combine their wide receiver room and their tight end room. They lose their top three tight ends in Hayden Hanson, Tony Livingston, and Amir Jackson, who combined for 5 touchdowns and roughly 600 yards receiving. So they brought in a few guys, Luke Harping from Georgia Tech. They also brought in a former wide receiver from ULM in Herring to play tight end as well. And then their receiver room, J. Michael Sturdivant graduated. Eugene Wilson and Aiden Mazzell hit the portal along with, I think, 6 other receivers. But I think they did really well with bringing in Eric Singleton from Auburn and Bailey Stockton from Georgia Tech. So those guys, and then Micah Mays from Wake Forest. Those 3 new additions combined for about 1,200 yards and 5 touchdowns last year to the wide receiver room. And they were able to keep Vernal Brown and Dallas Wilson, who were big playmakers for them last year. In the running back room, Jaden Ball stayed put, who, ran for almost 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. And then they brought in Evan Pryor and London Montgomery. Montgomery's from East Carolina, had 800 yards and 7 touchdowns last year. So I really like, even though they lost Jacoby Jackson, KD Daniels, and Trayon Webb in the running back room, I love where their running back room sits. And then over to the quarterback position, DJ Lagway is now a Baylor Bear. They brought in Aaron Philo from Georgia Tech, who I think maybe not long term over, the life of the career may not be as good as DJ Lagway could be based on his potential. But I think it gives them an immediate plus in the quarterback department with where Lagway's development is right now. He's playing with his former OC as well, and Buster Faulkner. So, there won't be a huge learning curve for Aaron there. So I like where the quarterback room is. Tramel Jones is going to be a quality backup. So I think overall Florida did really well in the portal, given, a brand new coach coming in. Did a really good job retaining key pieces on both the offense and especially the defense. So yeah, I think they did pretty well. Anybody have thoughts on Florida?
So I think you left out one huge addition for them who wasn't a player, and that's the offensive coordinator that they got, Buster Faulkner, that did a really good job at Georgia Tech. So you mentioned the players that they've got, and again, Philo played at Tech the last couple of years too. So Faulkner's very familiar with him, and he's confident in him. Very different quarterback than Haynes King. Philo's more of a pocket passer. He's athletic, but he's going to throw. But I think Faulkner's. We've picked a lot of coaches and a lot of coordinators that were going to be coaches, and just about all of them fulfilled that this year. And I think Faulkner's the next OC that you got to put on that potential head coach upcoming group. So I think he's a big addition, and I'm like you. I like what they've done. And I think the biggest thing that they did in the transfer portal to help themselves was talking Jaden Ball out of the portal when Texas came at him hard with a lot of money. So, and Summerall talked a lot of other guys out of the portal when he first got there too. So I really like what Florida did, and I like what their talent is going to give them next year. The quarterback position's a little bit of a question, but again, Faulkner being familiar with the quarterback he brought in and that type of stuff and what he can do, I think we'll see Florida take a good step forward.
Yeah, losing Lagway, he really didn't show much in his first 2 years, despite the hype and the ability and everything. And perhaps he'll go to Baylor and be better if he can stay healthy. That seems to be his Achilles heel. Literally, is the ability to stay on the field. So if he can do that, then good for him. But Florida, I don't think Florida's going to miss him a lot because he just never really performed anywhere near the expectations. The staff there is working hard. They're ready to attack the SEC. So we'll see what happens. I won't give them a grade, but I'm very interested to see what comes out of Gainesville this spring with spring ball and stuff as far as their portal guys go. I guess that'll take us to the University of Georgia and their transfer portal class. So to date, Georgia has picked up a total of nine guys out of the portal. They lost 14. Georgia's ranked somewhere in the 50s if you're into the rankings and those types of things. The one thing Georgia has been consistent with is keeping a lot of their star players at home. They haven't lost a lot of huge names in the portal era. Their two biggest losses. For this year is Jamal Merriweather. He's an offensive tackle who jumped in the portal at the last second and committed to Miami, and Elo Madozi, who only was on the field for 5 or 6 games last year. He had 5 tackles, but the year prior he had 6.5 sacks and like 39 tackles. So the kid has ability, and he's shown that he can play in the SEC. He transferred to Purdue, so I imagine that he's going to go up there and do really well in Purdue's defense. He may not have the success from a team standpoint that he did at Georgia, but he'll go up and put up numbers at Purdue. As far as the guys that Georgia brought in, I think their biggest acquisitions, pardon me, are Amaris Williams, who's a defensive lineman out of Auburn, who came over from Auburn. And he was recruited by Georgia when he came out originally. That's a great pickup. And then wide receiver Isaiah Kenyon out of Georgia Tech, who had 33 catches for 480 yards this season. They expect big things out of him over on the Plains. Georgia, like I said, they're not big players in the portal because they do a really good job of retaining guys. And as I look at their 2 deep, these guys are young. I mean, they don't have a lot of seniors in their 2 deep. Which is insane for a school that has been as successful consistently as Georgia has. So I think that Georgia does a great job of retaining players. Their retention grade is an A. As far as gaining players, I'll give them a B. I think that they go out and they go after needs, but they don't attack the portal like a lot of other teams do. And Kirby's got 2 titles in the past 5 years or so it's really hard to argue with what he's doing there. We'll see if it plays out for him in the long run, though. Either you guys got any thoughts on Georgia's class? Kev?
Yeah, I think like you said, Georgia's so loaded with what they do in high school. When you look at they bring Stockton back. Their biggest hole that they got to fill is wide receiver in their passing game. That being said, they have some guys there, and they have some young guys that they recruited as freshmen last year that will play next year. Defensively, they bring a lot back there. So I still like where they are. And again, nobody recruits the offensive line better than Georgia when you really look at the whole and the depth that they have in the offensive line year over year. So even though they're not big portal players, I think the key there for them is they retain their guys and they keep the retention going and they develop them. So it's a little different than what most people do. But I think the talent, when you look at roster their roster. I think the roster will be every bit as talented next year in a different way. I look for them to be more run the ball next year with the ability to pass. I think Stockton will take a step forward, but I think their running game will take another step forward with the age of their offensive line. Juan Gaston, I think, will be a big player for them next year. He played a lot this year, and the other offensive lineman that played at guard for him that was out of Langston Hughes. I think their interior offensive line will be really good, and they'll run the ball very strong. D-Mac, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's a testament to how well Georgia recruits at the high school level. We've seen plenty of SEC teams have 30, 35 guys hit the portal. So Kirby does a good job at keeping guys there, so he only has to fill a minimal amount of holes. So love what Georgia's doing. They are a team that still manages to do really well in the high school ranks and retain those guys for kind of true roster and development of player there. So they are on kind of a minority in the SEC of teams that do that well. Looking at what other teams in the SEC are bringing in. You've got geez, only 3 or 4 teams that are less than 20 guys brought in the portal. So they have the high school recruiting and the player development side working in their favor largely compared to really all schools across the country. So
They're definitely the unicorn.
One last thing I wanted to add about Georgia and their portal and how they handle their NIL. Kirby's not big on paying a guy who has done nothing for the University of Georgia all this money to come in, and he hasn't proven himself. The younger guys on the Georgia roster aren't making the money that the older guys do, but they know when they get to when they get into those bigger roles and they're on the field more, they're going to get more out of it. So they do a good job, I think, of keeping the locker room content as far as they're not rocking the boat, bringing in a couple of $4 million cats from from different schools that that could come in and kind of shake things up in the locker room a little bit. That's the most interesting thing, not to get off Georgia topic, but that's the most interesting thing about LSU this year is it's going to be interesting to see how the coaching staff handles all these different transfers and personalities and how some of the old guard's going to look at, these new guys making all this money because everybody in the world knows what they're making now. So that's going to be a real juggling act for coaches in the future, keeping all these kids happy money wise and whatnot. Where we go next?
We want to jump over to Alabama.
Get them.
Yeah, that works for me.
All right. So, Alabama, we looked at them coming into the 2025 season as one of the best total rosters in the SEC. And, again, I think if you go 2024, 2025, both those rosters still had a lot of talent that Saban had brought in. And then it allowed DeBoer to bring a few additions into the team and really had a good rosters, if not the best roster in the SEC, top 2, 3. I think 2026 is going to be a little different. I don't see them in the top 3 to 4 rosters at all. I would put Texas, Georgia, LSU with the portal additions that they've made. Maybe even Ole Miss. That may be going a little bit too far from a roster standpoint. If Florida gets good quarterback play, so I guess long story short, what I'm saying here is I think we're going to see this Bama roster take a little step back as far as just sheer NFL talent. So let me kind of go from here. So let's start at quarterback. You lose Ty Simpson, and you have Austin Mack and Keelan Russell. Now, both of those guys have a lot of potential, but Simpson has a chance to be a potential number 1 draft pick this year, and I don't think Mack and Russell will play to that level of a number one pick or a first round pick. Excuse me. Simpson's not a number one pick, but a first round pick next year. So I think you'll have some growing pains from a quarterback position there with those two. Um, Running back wise, they lost Jam Miller. They add, Daniel Hill played a lot at the end of the year. They also lost Richard Young in the portal, so they lose a little bit of depth there. They had Hollywood Smothers, but Texas came in after he committed to Bama and took him away. So they don't really gain anything in that running back spot. And, I think they honestly drop a little bit just because they lose some depth. And if you look, they're one thing that kept them from being uh, going any further in the playoffs this year was the absolute lack of a running game. They just didn't have it. So then that takes you into the offensive line. And while I think they added a lot of depth guys in the offensive line, I think, again, the overall top end prospects, I don't think they have that. So I'll start Cam Proctor or Caden Proctor, their left tackle, who's probably going to be a guard in the NFL. They don't have any offensive linemen next year that the talent level of him. Then you have Brailsworth at the center position, who is also going to be an NFL player. So I don't think they replace him either. Formby, who committed to Texas A&M, really struggled at tackle. He started at right tackle at the beginning of the year. They slid him inside at offensive guard when they had injuries with Jaden Roberts and Vandermark. And Formby played pretty solid inside. So with him and Cam Dewberry. So to me, they lose a lot between Proctor, Dewberry, Brailsworth, Formby at guard. Not an elite offensive line, but a lot of experience and a lot of good players in that. And they replace them with Javen James, who started left tackle for Mississippi State. I think you can plug him in at left tackle, but again, the high end of him is not at Proctor's level. You also have Nick Brooks, Ty Hayward from Michigan that's coming in for them. Rayson Delgathi is going to come in and play center for them. So, they bring in a lot of people. I just don't know if they're going to be at that level. A lot of the Bama fans talk about Jackson Lloyd potentially playing left tackle. I think with Javen James coming in, that's been a starter at that position, you'll see Jackson move to right tackle. And I think that gives them a solid group at right tackle, or a solid group of tackles with James and Jackson. I just think you're going to see, again, I don't know that they'll be any worse because their offensive line wasn't good this year. But I will say this, the talent level won't be as good. I think they may be better coached along the offensive line. But they need that offensive line to take a major step forward to develop a running game, especially with young quarterbacks. Look, Simpson had to carry that offense this year. Then you go to the wide receiver room, and they lose two guys that really played a big role for them this year in Jeremy Bernard and Isaiah Horton. And then they lose Cole Adams, who returned punts and was a depth guy at wide receiver. Ryan Williams, as talented as a wide receiver that's in the SEC, really had a sophomore slump season, dropped a lot of passes, and we will see, if he can get what he had back. They have to have him step back up if their offense is going to be in the top half of the SEC. But I do like Latsier Brooks, the freshman that came on this year, and he was actually a 3-star recruit. But I think he had a really solid year, and I think you can definitely count on him. He was very dependable, made a lot of 4th down catches and 3rd down catches, key catch against Missouri to get that win when they were up there. So I think, he'll be solid. And they took Noah Rogers from North Carolina State as a transfer. So I think, again, I just look at talent level. Quarterback's going to take a step back. Offensive line's not going to be any better. And then wide receiver, you're not going to have the dynamic pieces there. Now, one other person that's a freshman that's coming in that was a 5-star, Darius Morgan from Alexander City. They're going to count on him to do a lot. They're going to have him, play a big role in that offense. But I still think they lose more at wide receiver, losing Horton to A&M and Bernard. then they're going to add to that wide receiver room. And then you go over to the defensive side, which to me was very solid for them this year. It was a top 10 defense. And again, like, similar to Ole Miss, I think they lose a lot on the edge. When you look at the edge position, they lose LT Overton. They lose Russell, who I don't think he was elite, but he was a solid player. Keon Keeley, who played really well for him down the stretch. I think, losing him to the portal and he's going to Notre Dame. I just think that's a lot to lose there. And Noah Carter was a young guy that they lost. And then, of course, we already mentioned Renaud, who went to Ole Miss. So they lose a lot on the edge, in my opinion. And then inside, they lose James Smith, and then Tim Keenan graduated. I do like what they've done as far as inside. I think a lot of what they've done depth-wise inside will actually make them stronger inside. They brought in Terrence Green from Oregon, and then they brought in Kendrick Beasley Jones from Mississippi State and Devin Tompkins. I think those three guys give them more depth inside. Again, though, you did lose James Smith and Keenan, so that's big losses. And then they did get a defensive end from South Carolina and Desmond Omezulu, but again, to me, the losses there far outweigh the gains. And then I think the one position that they really take a big hit is middle linebacker this year. They lost Jefferson and Lawson, two experienced linebackers that had a lot of tackles for them. They did get the transfer from Virginia Tech, I believe it was, Caden Woods. And then they had they've got redshirt freshman QB Reese, and then Caden Jones, who's a sophomore. But I think they're going to take a big step back at that inside linebacker position. And I look at that in that edge position, and I think their defense is going to slip a little bit. Secondary-wise, they're really talented. They're probably the strongest position on their team is their secondary. And they bring back – it was big to get both of their safeties, Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb, to commit to coming back. I think if anything can save that defense to be at the same level that it was last year, it'll be that safety position in the secondary. And then they had Dijon Lee, who was a freshman who started a lot of games at cornerback. Xavier Brown, who's been pretty much a 2-year starter for him. And then Red Morgan will be the nickel back. So secondary strong. I think the interior, their defense will be solid. I think they take some lumps at the edge position, and then I think the inside linebacker position could be a position that they really hurt at. So they're going to have some people step forward there. Look, they're still going to be a good team. But I look at this roster as the 5th, 6th best type roster, in the SEC. And that is very different from an Alabama standpoint. I felt like they had the highest floor last year. This year, I think they're a square 8-4 type team. And I don't know that they'll get 9-3 this year. They have a really tough 3-game stretch towards the end of October, 1st of November, where they play LSU, A&M, Tennessee. And I just think, it's a good team, but I don't know that this roster can keep that fan base happy, because I know 8-4 will not keep them happy. 9-3 will not keep that fan base happy if they don't make the playoffs. So I think good team, but I think a step back for Alabama. You guys' thoughts?
Yeah, on the offensive line for them, that's probably my biggest concern on this team. They lose 10 of their 3 deep from last year, lose 4 starters. So the talent level's not going to be there. It's really going to come down to a coaching standpoint on how well they can coach them up. So I think even though the O-line had all the talent and wasn't as big of a strength as many expected, I think they're going to take a big downtick in the production on the offensive line this year too. What are your thoughts, Sweets?
I agree. This is going to be a really telling year for Kalen DeBoer and his staff over in Tuscaloosa, with with the talent not being what it was at the Saban level, which that's obviously hard to maintain. But with what they've lost and brought in, I really see Alabama struggling next year. To like you said, I see 8-4 as a very, very high probability for them, with what they've lost and with their they just don't have the ability to recruit like they did before with Saban. With NIL and everything. A lot of people claim that Bama was the original NIL, and that's why they were so good for all those years. Well, whatever. They were whooping everybody, and now they're not. Whatever the cause of that is, Saban leaving, NIL portal, whatever. These guys are going to find out what's what this year with their coaching staff, because they're going to have to do work to get them to the playoffs. And I'll tell you what, if Alabama makes a playoff this year, I will tip my cap to Kalen DeBoer and that staff, because that will be a hell of a job with the talent they have over there to navigate an SEC schedule and get to a playoff. So those are my thoughts on Alabama.
Nice. So that brings us to the in-state rival, the Auburn Tigers. Another team that struggled last year, finishing 5-7. Brought in new head coach Alex Golish from South Florida, and they have been busy in the portal. Lost 36 guys and brought in 39. And starting with their quarterback room, they lose Deuce Knight to Ole Miss. They lose Ashton Daniels to Florida State, and their season opening quarterback Jackson Arnold to UNLV. But they do bring in Byron Brown from South Florida, who threw for almost 3,200 yards, 28 touchdowns, and then ran for another 1,114 touchdowns. So I do think for next year anyway, they do get a big plus at the quarterback position. Byron Brown was a top 5 or 6 quarterback in the portal this year, followed his head coach over to Auburn, and is going to be QB1 for them. Where I really question them is the depth. They brought in Tristan Tia from Oregon State, who was a backup, Lachlan Hewlett, who was a backup at USF. That's kind of their 3 deep. Will Myers is still there, who was a 4-star freshman last year. So they're not very deep at the quarterback position, but Byron Brown, my opinion, is a huge upgrade from what they had this year. And then you look at the running back room. Jeremiah Cobb announced he was coming back. He was 30 yards shy of 1,000-yard season last year. Ran the ball like 175 times. So Omar Mabson's back. He was a true freshman last year. And then they brought in a couple of guys. They brought in Bryson Washington from Baylor, who ran for almost 800 yards. They brought in Nakai Davenport from USF, who ran for over 600, and Tay Meadows from Troy, who ran for 700. So I feel like the running back room, even though they lost Justin Jones and Darrell Robinson, who had left the team during the season, they're going to be fine running back room. But here's where I find the first major issue with them is the wide receiver room. I mentioned they lost 36 players in the portal. Feels like 36 of them were wide receivers. They lose Cam Coleman, Eric Singleton, Malcolm Simmons, Horatio Fields, who got hurt. And then Sam Turner was starting to get some play late in the year. But Cam Coleman, 56 catches, 708 yards. Eric Singleton, 58 catches, 534. Malcolm Simmons, 25 for 457. Perry Thompson had 17 catches. Horatio Fields had 12 before he got hurt. That is basically all of their wide receiver production, except for 4 catches, have transferred out. And 3 of those went to SEC programs, 1 went to Texas Tech, and 1 went to Minnesota. So, yeah, they replaced that with 5 guys from USF. Keyshawn Singleton had 878 yards at South Florida. Jeremiah Koger had 600 yards. Chaz Nimrod had 466. And then Christian Neptune had 320 yards. And then they brought in a, freshman Corey Pettigrew from South Florida too. So they are heavily banking on the South Florida offense translating over to Auburn, which a lot of times when you see that go full force with, a mid-major program moving all their players to a SEC or Big Ten school typically does not work out as planned. So they took an absolute beating in the wide receiver room, losing all the guys that they did. Um, Pretty similar in the tight end room too. Yeah, they didn't utilize their tight ends as much this year, but they lose 2 guys who, had 23 of the 26 receptions from the room. They did bring in Jonathan Eccles from South Florida, who had 3 touchdowns, and then Jake Johnson, a former Texas A&M guy, former North Carolina guy, one-time LSU commit, is now playing for the Auburn Tigers in his last year. So they took a beating in the receiving room for sure. And then when you look at their offensive line, they lose Xavier Chaplin, their left tackle, to Florida State. Dylan Wade, their left guard, graduated. Connor Liu, their center, is going to the draft. Jeremiah Wright has graduated, who was their right guard. Mason Murphy is back. Um, I think he's waiting in a pill for another year potentially. So I don't know if he will actually be back or not. So they brought in a few guys. They brought in Cole Best from South Florida, Cole Skinner from South Florida, at center and guard, respectively. They brought in Jacob Strand from Oregon State to play left tackle. They've got a few other guys. They've got another left tackle and Stanton Ramel from Michigan State. But I don't know how well this rebuilt offensive line that lost a lot of talent is going to look on a team that was 5-7 last year, losing that type of talent. And then over to the defensive side of the ball, they were able to keep DJ Durkin. And when they initially retained him, I thought that was going to be a really good thing for the defense, but they have lost a lot. They had a lot of older guys. So Keldrick Falk, who's going to be probably a top 15 or 18 pick in this year's draft, is heading off. Bobby Jamison Travis, Dallas Walker, both graduated. Amaris Williams went to Georgia. Malik Blockton is off to LSU. So Jordan Crawford was a true freshman last year who will have some chances to make an impact. He only played 7 games this past year. And they brought in a lot from quite a few guys from the portal. They've got Cody Singer, who had 5 sacks, but he was at a D2 school last year. Nate Johnson from Missouri comes in after 7 tackles. Walter Mathis, who was a freshman at LSU, comes over, who he's a guy I think has a lot of potential. And then they did bring in Corey Wells, who's a 4-star defensive tackle. So that the defensive tackle and edge room is going to look a lot different with all the pieces they lost and not really bringing an impact guy in. Then you go over to their linebacker room. They retained Xavier Atkins and Elijah Melendez, who I think are going to be two key parts for that room. They did lose Robert Woodyard Jr., who I think was the second best linebacker on their squad, 54 tackles last year, and Kayron Crawford, who played like a little bit of edge and linebacker, graduates after 5 sacks last year. And all they brought in on the defensive line and edge is 3 or 4 guys from the high school ranks. Jaquez Wilkes is going to be a good guy, good player moving forward, but I think he's going to take a year to develop. One guy I do want to mention in their linebacker room, Demarcus Riddick, was a guy who took maybe a little bit of a step back last year. They're going to need him to step up this year as well. So, in my opinion, also took a little bit of a beating at linebacker outside of returning Xavier Atkins. And then you look at their defensive backs. Kyan Lee, Jay Crawford, their top 2 corners, both transferred out to Tennessee and Ole Miss, respectively. Um, Jaquez Robinson, a safety, graduated. They do return some guys that I think are going to be good, like Caleb Harris, Sylvester Smith, Champ Anthony. I think Anquan Fagans, who was a true freshman last year, is going to really take a step up this year. With Rayshon Pleasant, he's dangerous in the return game and had some good moments at corner. But from a transfer standpoint, there in the defensive backs, they brought a couple guys in, Gavin Jenkins and Fred Gaskin from South Florida, Shamor Anu from Florida State, a corner. I think, he played in 11 games last year, had a couple tackles, a pass breakup. And then they also brought in Andre Jordan from UCLA, who had 7 pass breakups. You know, I just I think the losses definitely outweigh the gains outside of the quarterback room largely here. I really give Auburn like a C minus in their total revamp. It would probably be lower if it wasn't for Byron Brown. I think he kind of keeps them in the C minus range. It would probably be a D or D minus without him. So what are your thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, I think again you brought the wide receiver room up, and I think the question is the quarterback play has been so bad there the last 2 3 years, 3 years that can good quarterback play with solid receivers offset bad quarterback play with great receivers. I think that's possible, but I will say this too. I think Brown is going to be a better player at quarterback than what they've had. I also say this: he got a lot of numbers against G4 teams, not strong defenses. They beat Florida last year, but that was a defensive slugfest, and it was a game that he played solid, but he wasn't really good by any means. So I just think that offensively, while I think Golish will do really good things for them long term, and I like the offense that he'll employ with the spread, it's kind of that Baylor type offense. I think that wide receiver loss, and I don't think quarterback will be enough to offset it. And I really, even though Brown's going to be better than what they have, I think he's still bottom half of the SEC at the quarterback position. And then the second position that I think that really will hurt them is their offensive line losses. I think their offensive line losses will really take a chunk to them with Lou, with Chaplin. Chaplin went to Florida State. I just think there are going to be a lot that they lose there. So I think the offensively they're going to be very inconsistent. I like what they have defensively. I do think the losses that they have at edge and a little bit in the secondary are going to hurt them. I like what they have at tackle, even though their defensive tackle room is going to be young. Um, I like Jordan. I like Mathis from LSU, and then some of the other depth guys. And then I love Xavier Atkins. But again, I think you're 100% on spot on when you talk about losing Woodyard. Summerall did a great job of getting guys back at Florida. Golish did not have that same luck at Auburn with saving any of those guys that left. So I just man, where is Auburn football at for a team that from 2000 to 2015 and then had a good year in 2000, I think it was 17 that they played in the SEC championship against Georgia. For a team that was really at the top, 4 or 5 teams in the SEC the last couple years, they've been 10, 11, 12. And I think they have another year like that next year. I think it's going to be very, very hard for them to finish with a winning record. I think 6-6 is probably the ceiling on this team with the talent they've got and the losses that they've had in the portal. I think it's a big hit. Sweet, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, Auburn lost a ton in the receiver room, obviously, and losing Kane Lee to Tennessee at corner is really going to hurt them as well. The question you posed earlier, will better quarterback play with lesser receivers, make a difference in the room? I think it will, because I think the coaching is going to be a little better, and honestly, it's going to be tough for Auburn to have much worse quarterback play than they have had in recent years, because it's just been god awful under Hugh Freeze. So I look forward to Auburn being a little bit better offensively, but with the losses on the line, boy, they're going to have to strike gold there, and have some really strong development with that new staff there. Um, we'll see what happens. Can they be worse than last year? Yes. But I don't think they will be. I think that Auburn is excited. They want to have a good football program with that toxic booster leadership. It's tough to keep it on the tracks, but I think that they're going to try to pull it together, because I like SEC football better when Auburn's good. It makes the SEC better. It makes it tougher for Bama, for Tennessee, for Georgia, for LSU. It makes it tougher for everybody when Auburn's good. And I hope they're able to get back there eventually. Where are we going next? I guess Tennessee.
Yeah. I got one
Okay.
more
Yes,
comment on
please.
Auburn. The one pro that they have going for them with the slightly better quarterback play, less wide receiver talent, is all of those guys did play together the last couple years. So they'll already have that chemistry, which is going to be a big plus. I don't think it's enough to get them to 7-5. I think they're closer to 5-7 or 4-8, similar year as they had this year. And I can tell you, Auburn fans are really not all that excited with where their program is. It's been a tough time for the Auburn fans I talked to. You had these high expectations for football, and you go 5-7. Bruce Pearl retires right before basketball season. The guys who are Auburn fans that I know who aren't even big baseball guys are saying, "Hey, I guess we're a baseball school now." So they're more excited for baseball than they've ever been before.
Oh, well, they got to have something to hope for back there, because with now that Pearl's gone in basketball, they're not as good there either. That was the biggest Auburn loss in the past 5 years was Bruce Pearl leaving that program. Football, baseball be damned. Um, we'll jump into Tennessee in the transfer portal here, and I think the biggest addition to Tennessee this offseason is actually not a transfer portal player, but actually the defensive coordinator Jim Knowles from Penn State. Came over after that whole staff was let go up there, along with James Franklin. And what he's done at Tennessee so far is he's brought in 4 starters from Penn State's defense to help solidify Tennessee's defensive woes that they had in 2025, led by one of the top players in the portal, Chaz Coleman, an edge guy, sophomore, rising sophomore from Penn State. Not big on production, had a total of 8 tackles and 1 sack last year, I believe. But potential. They're big on his potential. They also pick up defensive lineman Xavier Gilliam from Penn State as well, along with where were my other two Penn State guys at? Give me 1 sec. Damn it, I lost them here on the page. I'll get them back up. But so defensively, they've retooled. Their top 7 players that they picked up in the portal were defensive guys. That tells you where Josh Heupel and that staff are leaning to. They really want to shore up that defense, which has been solid in years past at Tennessee, but just had a little bit of a hiccup in 2025. Losses for Tennessee: they lose a left tackle, Lance Hurd, who is now on his 3rd school, LSU, to Tennessee, to Kentucky now. Hurd was thought as somebody who would probably be going to the draft after his junior year. Things didn't pan out the way he had thought, so he's going to head to Kentucky to try his luck there. He got a good little payday to go there. Tennessee also lost cornerback Ricky Gibson to Texas A&M. Not big on stats. Didn't have a big year stat wise. Played better in 24 than he did in 25. But that's a big loss as well as losing edge player Jordan Ross to LSU. That's a big pickup for LSU, and he will be missed on the defensive side of the ball for Tennessee as well, along with Boo Carter, who couldn't stay out of trouble in his time at Knoxville. Now he will go to Colorado. Yeah, I know, he was our fantasy guy, Kev. Now he will go to Colorado to see if he can have the the greatest cornerback of all time, Deion Sanders, groom him into an NFL prospect at safety. I'm looking forward to Tennessee having a much better season than they did last year. Tell me, has anybody heard anything on the Aguilar, if he has gotten his 14th year or whatever it is, or is he going to have to be replaced? Because I was trying to find that and couldn't find it.
It's so quiet, and the thing that's amazing is it's very similar to Pavia, and then you got Chambliss and all these other guys that are getting their extra years, and you're hearing it's crickets on Aguilar. But why wouldn't he get it? If Pavia got it, why wouldn't he? If Chambliss gets it, why wouldn't he? I guess maybe there's not a friendly judge in Tennessee that they can throw it in that court to get it approved for him. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure but if they get Aguilar back, Tennessee's going to be okay. They've got a lot of talent up there, and I like Heupel. I think Tennessee scores points. I think his offense, I think it's a little gimmicky, but they score points. And when they got a good defense, as they did in 24, you saw they ended up in the playoff. So if they can, shore up the defense and get Aguilar back, I think they're going to be fine. They did pick up backup quarterback Ryan Staub. I think his kid's name's from Colorado. Played in 4 or 5 games for Colorado this year as a backup. Nothing special. He lost his backup job to Juju Lewis during the year, but take whatever you can get, I guess, at this point for Tennessee. You guys have any thoughts on Tennessee, DMAC?
Yeah, that defensive backfield, they lose Colton Hood, Andre Turretine, Jake McMurray. So they lost a few guys. I think Ty Redmond's going to be a big piece, and like you said, they did do well with like Kayin Lee in the transfer portal, and then DeJon Lane from Penn State is going to be a good piece. I think a lot of their success is going to hinge on, does Aguilar get another year, or are they looking at, George McIntyre or Faison Brandon as quarterback, or Ryan Staub. And if it's Ryan Staub, I think they are in some serious trouble
Yeah,
if he's
I don't
their week one opener.
I don't think he'll be starting. But stranger things have happened. Stranger things have happened.
Let's consider this though. You talk about coaches that seem to get certain things that happen every year. When is the last time Heupel's had bad quarterback play? It's not always been elite, but he gets, So I think, and we thought Aguilar might be a step down, and he ended up having a really good year. Now, personally, I think Aguilar is going to get his extra year, but if he doesn't, I think McIntyre will probably have a good year for him, being a year in that system. I like what Tennessee has. They got a lot of good young receivers. Losing Lance Hurt at tackle will hurt him a little bit, but I'm going to throw this name in there too. Ori Williams, I really thought the way that he played at LSU the last couple of games, I think he's got some talent to play tackle. So I like that. And then their defensive talent is strong. And I think Knowles coaching that defensive group is going to make them much, much better.
Yes,
They've underperformed. They've got a lot of talent on that defensive side at all three levels: line, middle linebacker, secondary. So I think they're a good team. Again, I would probably put them somewhere in that 5 to 7 overall SEC roster. A team that could, they get a couple home games next year. Let's say they beat LSU and Alabama at home, they sneak into the playoffs.
they're a playoff team. Yep.
Yeah, I really did not like Jim Knowles going to Tennessee as an LSU fan. I was really hoping he'd go to the Big Ten or the ACC and be a DC. So that's like you said, Sweets. That was their pickup of the offseason. And they added quite a few really good players, but it all starts with Jim Knowles, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's going to do a good job there. He's got 5 pieces on the defense that he's coached at Penn State for multiple years. The other 2 players I was missing on was linebacker Amari Campbell and safety Dwan Lane, are the other 2 Penn State starters that came over with Knowles. So he brought over a third of the defense with him from Penn State, so there's some familiarity there. And 2 of those kids were rated very high. Chaz Coleman was, I think, one of the top 5 players in the portal overall, and Gilliam was one of the top defensive linemen. So it's not going to be for talent if they don't do well, but we'll see if he's able to bring those guys together and if they're able to gel as a unit. With all the portal additions that they had. Where are we going next?
We going to Oklahoma? We're going to do one more round of a couple teams at least, or how do we want to roll?
Yeah, we'll do one more round each if y'all want.
Let's do it.
So Oklahoma's a team that didn't have a whole lot of transfer portal stuff, as much as some teams. They did have their fair share, but not as much as others. And so when I look at what they did, as far as what came into them, I wouldn't say that they brought a lot of elite talent in this year to their team, but I think they filled in some gaps nicely with what they've done. I looked at their team last year as a team that offensively didn't have a lot of firepower to just elite athleticism at several positions. Santana ended up being a very good wide receiver that made some explosive plays, but they need more offensively. And I think that's where you look at what they've done with their additions. They got Parker Livingstone at wide receiver, which to me will be a possession guy, but good wide receiver. And then Terrell Harris at wide receiver too. I think those are 2 good additions that they need. And then tight end with – obviously, they had to replace a good tight end there. And so they got Jack Van Dorsler and then also Hayden Hanson from Florida. So I think, that'll help them offensively. And then offensive tackle, look, their line has been their biggest opportunity the last couple of years. And they had a lot of their depth on their offensive line transfer out. Amarian Harris, though, is an offensive tackle that can transfer in and start. And I think with some of their young guys, Fasucci at the other tackle position and some of the young guys on the offensive line, I think they'll take a step forward there. So overall, offensively, I think this team will take a small step forward offensively. To me, last year they were just a little below the middle, I think, and as far as offensive production is how I would, say that where they landed. I think they can take a small step forward and be a good offense next year. When you flip it to the defensive side of the ball, look, their defensive line's still going to be very strong. They didn't really lose anybody there per se. Interesting thing though, they lost linebackers, and to me, their front seven was the whole key to that team last year. They lost Sammy Omozigo, who's going to UCLA, who was a really effective linebacker for him, and Kobe McKenzie. And I don't see them replacing those guys. And then they lost Gentry Williams, a cornerback that's going to Georgia. They lost a couple of linemen and Logan Hovland and Jacob Sexton, like I referenced. More depth guys. I mean, they started and played for them some, but would be depth on their team next year. So I don't really see them replacing those linebackers. And their secondary to me was their weak point last year, and I don't see secondary additions that make me feel like they're going to improve there. So I look at their team as a little better offensively, but with what they lose at linebacker and losing Gentry Williams, who may have been their best corner, I think they're going to take a small step back defensively. Even though they got a really good front group from defensive end to defensive tackle and depth there, I think that linebacker position and what they lost a little bit in the secondary, I think they'll take a step back there. And they, look, they won a lot of toss-up games. They beat Tennessee, they beat LSU, they beat Alabama, all toss-up games that they won. They beat Auburn early in a game that could have went either way. So when you look at all four of those games, it could have went either way, and they were able to secure wins there. I see this team in danger of kind of losing some of that. So I think they'll be a solid team. Roster-wise, SEC-wise, I'd put them 8-9. And I think, again, an 8-4 type team next year is where I would put this Oklahoma team. Anybody got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love their running back room still. I am a huge Tory Blaylock fan, the true freshman this year, and Xavier Robinson. That's going to be a strong 1-2 punch. I'm with you though. The offense definitely looks like it got some needed improvements. But yeah, the defense is gonna take a little bit of a step back. I do really like Kip Lewis and Owen Heineke at
Yes.
linebacker, but outside of that, they're going from 5 guys who were good to 2 guys. And I don't know if Cole Sullivan from Michigan is going to be enough to replace any of those guys.
And they used Heineke a lot on the edge. So, I just, yeah, yep.
Yeah, it was a hell of a coaching job by Venables this year. Because I'll be honest with you, at the end of October, if somebody would have said, give me odds on Oklahoma making the playoff, I probably would have said about 30-1. And the way they handled the end of the year was fantastic. They didn't score a lot of points, but that defense bowed its neck and got stops literally every single time they needed to in the month of November. So it's that they've lost some talent, but Venables proved himself as a coach to me this year, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't think much of him as a head coach until this season, but he's really came into his own a little bit this year as a head man, and we'll see if he's able to maintain that role going into next season.
He managed games, to your point, Sweets, as good as you could manage them this year. He really played to their defensive strengths and their kicker, and able to just get, field position and get points. They had a good punter. He managed games as well as any coach in the SEC this year.
That's what good coaches do.
Yep, they sure do.
Well,
Where you going
any
next, Matt?
last minute thoughts before we wrap up tonight?
If you said sweets, any last minute thoughts? I got all kinds of thoughts swirling around my head right now. But as far as the transfer portal goes, you know, it's just this whole thing is still just surreal to me. You know, that we're talking about these kids that are getting millions to switch schools. And then you know what? I got $1 million to go to this school, and I'm in class, but these guys are going to give me $1 million too, so I'm going to leave class and go sign with this other school. I mean, this shit is just insane right now. So my thoughts is that I'm already exhausted from the transfer portal and everything that it entails, and I wish that they would just fix it so we're not having to do this every year, because it's not a lot of fun watching these guys recruit every player on the team every year. It's exhausting. I could see a mass exodus of good college coaches going to the pros, because this is a 365-day a year job now, and it's a lot. It's a lot. Kev?
Yeah, I mean, look, how hard have these coaches worked over the last month? I mean,
They earn
some
their
of
money.
them, yeah, some of these coaches has busted their ass. We talk about Golich and Auburn losing a lot, but boy, to fill the roster, he had to really work hard, and obviously Kiffin worked hard. Summerall worked hard. I mean, all of them, work really hard through this. It's an amazing deal. You work from August to December, and then you have the portal, and that takes you pretty much through January. It's a heck of a grind, and they don't work any harder than they work in January. So that's the amazing thing to me with all this stuff is one of the unsung things with this is how hard these college coaches have to grind to get through this. I guess maybe you take, when you start to February, you take a little bit of a couple of week window, and then you get right into spring football. And then that, maybe a little window there in the summer. But you also have recruiting that kicks in, around March for the next year too. So I guess my last thought with all this is just how hard a lot of these coaches have worked, and again, how entertaining it can be. We covered some interesting things. A lot of rosters we talked about tonight took a little step back. Um, Georgia will be good again next year. I think that roster is actually a little better next year. And then we're going to get into tomorrow when we cover LSU, Texas, some teams that, to me, really took a step forward in this too. So it's interesting stuff for sure.
D-Mac?
Yeah, when you talk about the transfer portal, the plus, the addition and subtraction in the SEC, I know some of those kids stayed in the SEC, but 791 transactions from leaving and going to schools just in the SEC.
It's amazing.
What's the average per team then? About 6?
That would be right at 50.
50?
16 teams,
Yeah.
800 would be 50 a team. Transactions both ways.
Yeah, so an average of 25 coming in, 25 leaving roughly. A little higher on the coming in for a lot of schools. Yeah, I mean, you had multiple teams hit the 35 addition mark, and a bunch of teams hit the 30 subtraction mark. That is a wild number in 14 days.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just it's not a sustainable model. I'm gonna hop off my soapbox, but this just can't continue to happen. College football, that they need to get it fixed tomorrow, because schools aren't going to be able to maintain this. There's going to be a half a dozen schools that spend all the money, and then everybody else is going to be, group of five. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's 57 kids a day over a 2-week period, either leaving or going to an SEC school.
That's insane. That is insane.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, that's a wrap for tonight. We will see you guys back here tomorrow night. Have a great evening. Stay safe in the weather, and remember to like, share, subscribe, follow all the internet stuff for us.